everyone, and welcome to our Signal Conversation. I'm Lauren Barrick, Managing Editor of Signal 360, and I'm here today with our co-editors-in-chief, Stan Houston and John Battelle. Welcome, you guys.
Hi, Lauren.
Welcome, Lauren. Well, this is a bit of a bittersweet moment. After almost 7 years, this will be the last Signal 360 that we create together. But we have a lot to celebrate, and I think I wanted to use the time here for the three of us just to reflect a little bit of what we have learned over the last 7 years, how we even got started and so on. So let's get started. I mean, there's so much to talk about.
There is a lot to talk about. So I want to hear from you guys. What stands out from when you started that first year? Because I wasn't there. So I want to hear from you guys.
Stan, didn't we get our, we started with a bang because we were covering CES in January of 2020, I believe. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. P&G had a big presence called the Life Lab at CES because one of the things that we saw is that our business P&G's business becomes also more technology driven. So we were a centerpiece at CES. And actually, in fact, I know that we met each other there actually also. That was our opening issue. And might I say it was quite the launch. We got more attention than I had expected at that point in time. So that was a really good start that put us on the map.
It was, but then, the world had another story for us just a couple months later. If I recall, all of a sudden we were in COVID lockdown.
Yeah, that was quite a shock. That was not quite what we planned because the original things that we had planned was shoot some videos in a New York studio once in a while. Like there was no traveling to New York. I think it was after March, like vacations got canceled. Things like the Signal event also got canceled. But before that, we tried to actually also get some direction on what might happen. Remember that interview with Peter Schwartz, one of the most renowned futurists, that we asked him what might happen, and he had a good, better, best scenario. And it was actually his worst scenario. It wasn't good, better, best. It was bad, even more bad, and really bad. And I think it became his really bad scenario out of that actually.
That's right. 18 months of lockdown is the really bad. And I think that's about where we ended up.
So there's a fair amount of uncertainty about the time and depth. I'd say the least possible is call it the next 3 months and a kind of fairly deep recession. The worst is call it 18 months and a fairly deep depression. So there's a range in terms of how long the crisis will persist.
Yeah, and he said something about 18 months we would see the end of it, and actually took much longer than that one. And it's even futurists don't get it all right. I think I don't know that Peter would have predicted that we're still dealing with the consequences, good, bad, and ugly, of COVID at that time. So yes, that was one that certainly hit us, but we covered it well.
And I think we've been, covering the sort of downstream implications of COVID ever since, in terms of impact on staffing and future work and, organizational structure and technology and advertising and all of the above. But we had to do a Signal, event. We had been planning it when we launched in January, and it was supposed to be 6 months later. And we had to pivot.
Yeah, no, that was a huge pivot because we froze everything for a couple of months because we didn't quite know what to do. Like just similar to the rest of the world, nobody knew what to do, right? Remember that nobody knew what Zoom was before COVID started, right? That seems to be like, really? Yes. And we found an event company that at that point in time was 10 people, a digital event company. We said, let's try them. Later, they were valued, I think, at like $2 billion. That deflated later on a little bit. But there was this whole COVID-induced investment thing. And we were a little bit part of that we made it all virtual. And I have to say, I'm extremely proud of what we did because we not only created a great program, we also expanded the audience. I think that year we got like 5,000 or 6,000 people to join us for Signal. And I think that also highlighted the role that we played. It's like the world keeps moving and people like to hear what's going on and get some sense of direction. And we were able to provide that. And it was very generous, I think, a P&G platform that we could do this for many more people than just the P&G people.
That's right. That's right.
So that was a big one. Yes.
And I think you touched on a really good point, Stan. I mean, I think Signal always sort of looked at and brought, into, the stories and the people, a way of looking ahead and touching on, things that, maybe other people hadn't heard of before. We brought in some really great experts too, that were able to kind of, open windows into ideas and, just thoughts that maybe were new to a lot of people. I'm wondering what are some great experts that stood out to you guys?
Yeah, I think the first to say is like, I think a good bit of John and my personality are reflected in a curiosity, right? And it's not limited to a certain domain. It's like, what's happening and why is it happening? John's a well-trained journalist. I'm just an aspiring one. But we shared a curiosity, and that always drove us to like, who are the people who have thought about it, right? The one that really stands out for me, just because we started reading some stuff, and it's interesting, people ask, how do you get these names? Like, well, we just reach out, right? So we read something from Nicholas Bloom, and I think it might have been John that says, like, I think I know him. Let's give him a call. And Nicholas Bloom is an economist at Stanford, but who happened to do some research on working from home. And it was pre-COVID, right? So can you imagine what a lab this was for him? And he made some predictions on this one. And, 6 years later, we are still talking about the impact of work from home on the future of work. And work has changed for all of us. I was even in a discussion this weekend with somebody about it. Like, people by exception worked from home for P&G. You had to get all kinds of paperwork done. They would like to have us in the office for the majority of the time, and it's usually 3 to 4 days that people are in the office. But there's a lot more flexibility because we've proven we can get the work done wherever we are, thanks to Zoom and other technologies. But it has really shaped the future. And Nicholas was actually one that really, already pointed to that.
I remember a couple of others all along the sort of in the same category of people who look forward. One of them who's made a career out of it is Faith Popcorn, who we had on a few years ago. And she was talking, if I recall, about the sort of home automation, which is something that, of course, all large companies, consumer-focused companies should be thinking about. And that's a topic we returned to several times over the last 5 or 6 years.
Have a brainstorming about the wildest things that could happen, even though, people tend in brainstorms go, that can never happen, no, we can't do that, no, that'll raise all that. Put that aside and say, what are all the things that could happen? And then say to yourself, suppose the competition comes up with that.
And another is Scott Galloway, who joined us a couple of times and also on stage at the Signal event. He had a couple of videos with us, Signal conversations that I guess went viral. They were some of our biggest audience draws. And he had a very memorable rant about education, if I recall, and what was broken in the education system, as well as advertising and marketing, of course, which is a little bit closer.
I don't think the education one was totally planned, but that was his topic that he was working on. And boy, did he let his opinion be known to us.
He sure did.
It's like he always gets some attention, and it's like, with Scott, it's like he's, and that's with any of the futurists and the people who think about it. They're not always right, but their opinions make you think, and that's exactly what we wanted to do with Signal 360. Don't assume that what we publish will be fact later on, but at least think about it, that whether this might be important to you and how important it might be.
Exactly.
Yeah. And advertising, of course, is one of the signature pillars. We had, certainly every issue we tried to hit on some of these core areas that were important to us. Advertising, there was supply chain, commerce, AI, of course, a lot of great innovation out of P&G. So what were some of the favorites? I'm going to ask you guys, what were some of your
Yeah.
favorites from those like 4 buckets, like 5 that we really always like wanted to make sure we were.
Yeah, and that's, advertising and commerce and supply chain are core to P&G. That's one of the reasons that we addressed it. And they're really interesting topics, as John will tell you about supply chain. I'll let him talk about that in a little bit. He might not have been that curious about supply chain 10 years back, but he is now. So advertising was always at the root of what we started with, because that's also, where I sit in P&G. So it's also funny, like, there are sometimes trends that you go like, is this real? Is this going to matter? And we try to dissect some of that. Like, remember the metaverse stuff, right? And I was skeptical at the times. Like, it's easy to say now, of course, but there was a lot of investment going into that. And we tried to dispel some of that, but there were some interesting aspects of it that really resonated too. It led to gaming, for example, right? Or it's connected to gaming. And one of the insights that we have found inside of P&G and what covered in the stories is, when people in advertising ask, where are the audiences or where have they gone? It's always underestimated how many people are involved in gaming. And this is not just smelly teenage boys in basements, okay? These are grown women playing Candy Crush and so on. And they spend time there. And our motto has always been, go where consumers are, but how you do it is a trick. And we covered topics like that on a regular basis to just bring the attention to, like, don't forget about this, or look how the world is working. So was advertising was always our bread and butter, of course, right? But
yeah, I think we did a really good job covering streaming as well. Now
yes.
that I look back at it, because it was really developing in 2021, and it's now the dominant and primary channel for video. But it wasn't 5 years ago, but we covered it continuously, and I think did a good job there. And now, Stan, to your point about supply chain, we covered it early and continued to cover it. Obviously, the supply chain was a huge story during the pandemic. But then we did one of my favorite stories is we covered the shipping container business because that's how a lot of things move around the world. I think it's 70 to 80% of things move around the world in shipping containers. And it turned out that the shipping containers were a very valuable way in to understand what was going on with supply chain because of the pandemic. So I'm proud of that piece as well.
Yeah, and supply chain continues to be important because, especially in this economic stage, the flexibility of supply chain and production remains a competitive advantage for businesses. To continue to provide value for consumers and customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Lauren, on the topic of innovation and P&G, I'll just hit, first of all, having 2 C-suite executives very much involved in Signal throughout the run of Signal 360. We had too many, conversations to count with Chief Brand Officer Mark Pritchard, of course, our, sort of our patron, if you will, here at Signal. But also with John Mueller. And those conversations were always very popular on Signal 360.
Very.
Yeah. And they were insightful because they also gave an insight view of P&G, and not just to the people outside, especially about, P&G, as I tell people, is as big as a city, right? And to keep a city informed, you need to have some of the leadership, talk about what's important. And then we added that to that, also just the people who did the work, the Signal innovators that we brought to the fore. I remember Tide Cold Water was a great story that we had. We had, things about Olay and accessibility, how the team with seemingly little change made the product much more accessible for people with motor skill problems. And so, I mean, innovation starts in small ways, but that also adds up to what we call P&G product and packaging superiority. And that's where it all starts, right? And these are not the leaders the leaders will set the direction, but it's all the people around P&G who are the ones that have executed, and are executing innovations that you go like, yes, that makes the project valuable for people to buy because they see a real benefit of this one. There's highly talented and creative people who have featured on this one. And that's worth watching again. The other one is we brought up a lot of startups from the outside that we worked with because, I always say it's like P&G people are really smart, but there's thousands and thousands of really smart people outside of P&G that we can learn a lot from. And that goes especially for startup founders. I found, and some of them are really inspiring, like Good Loop, but was about how do we bring, basically also sustainability to advertising and ethics to advertising. We started out with Jebit, which P&G has done a lot of business with, and Tom Coburn, who we interviewed, is no longer there. But it was about how gaming, quizzes actually are a great instrument for getting consumer insights. Everybody loves a good quiz, and it's just and how we got to that idea and so on. And it's inspiring to meet people who are working on new businesses that they're really passionate about and have some hypothesis. You go like, that's interesting, right? And that's what we always try to feature in Signals, like the moments of like, that's interesting, I want to learn more.
Yeah. Lastly, on commerce, we've had continual coverage of that, from live shopping features to features on new approaches to the last mile in Latin America, and then on AI, we had an extraordinary. I think, Lauren, you counted up 57 mentions of AI across the 60 issues of Signal 360.
I think it was something, I'm not sure it was me that counted them, but it was some, yeah. I mean, we were really pushing ahead on that.
Yeah. And let it be noted that we went into that area well before ChatGPT launched. Okay. I remember Signal conversation with Fei Li from Stanford, who was phenomenal and already had anticipated many of the issues that we're now discussing in a more open forum. And also a very special person, Joy Walamini, who pointed out that, the algorithms and the data, they are only as good as the data gets into it. And the data and the algorithms can be very biased by who create them. And it was a huge watch out, and it still is, that, algorithms aren't necessarily the truth tellers that we think they are. And we need to also compensate our own brains with challenging what we see the results. And, it's not just about hallucinations. It's also about how did these algorithms come to these conclusions because of the people who constructed them. So, we were very early on in that one. And that one that one is worth repeating. And if people watching this want to see this, I'm sure that we will provide a link somewhere. That one I would keep on the, the evergreen list of watch it once in a while to be reminded that technology is created by human beings, and human beings have flaws that can be reflected in the technology.
So Joy's interview was absolutely one of my, I think, top 10s. She was incredible. And there were some other favorites, because we've talked a lot about some really great pillars, some great pieces, but I kind of want to hear about your favorites that you guys had that stood out that maybe we haven't even touched on, because we've talked on a lot of them. But I really hope it's okay if I start, because one of my very favorite pieces we did was the piece on girls in STEM. And one of the reasons was I got to interview Rolanda Wilkerson, who was just really, thoughtful about making this important point, which was that girls and young women really need to see themselves in these roles so they have some way to aim as they're moving through their education, as they're coming up in their careers, especially in the areas of STEM, of science and technology. And that really sat with me. I really appreciated the time she gave me for that interview, but also I thought that story was just a great one for us.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and then as a father of a daughter who I've had some conversations with about her abilities in STEM, because sometimes it's the environment that, talks down to people, to young girls about like, you're not qualified to do that. It's like, that hit a note for me. I mean, there's too many anecdotes that I can mention that I won't do here, but like from a personal perspective, that one definitely was important for me. And it's not just important for people personally, but also for businesses. I mean, The lesson that I've always learned about P&G is that the P&G working environment, the 100,000 some people that make up P&G, are a reflection of the people in the world, right? And so it is very, very important to have talented women with STEM background. You talked about favorites. I have to say, it is okay. I'm gonna take a quick break, and I'll get something, and I'll show you which one it is. So just a second, okay? I should have done this before. This is my favorite. This is my favorite. So that was just a great story
too.
Yeah, this is my favorite, and the reason for that one isn't the product. I mean, we talked P&G in abstract forms about superior product packaging, superior brand communication, superior retail execution, and superior customer and consumer value. I read an article one time in the Wall Street Journal. It was a whole page. They did two actually on this one, and I was reading through it and like, that's the story. And who wouldn't love beer, right? And then we were preparing for Signal. And I remember bringing it up in a discussion with John and Mark's, like, here's the story. It's like, read this story. And he's like, there's probably no way to get this guy. And John said, like, fearless John would say, it's like, I'll call him, right? And the answer was, sure, should we bring beer? Well, what are you going to say, right? So it was probably the story for me, and not just from business only, which is phenomenal story. And I want everybody to watch that, like the story on this one. They have built a complete businesses that hits all the superiority vectors that P&G proclaims. And it's just an amazing story, right? If I wasn't working at P&G, I'd be calling them. Okay. So that remains my favorite.
Yeah, you kind of stole my thunder. I would have picked that, but close second would be a story we did during the early pandemic on Procter & Gamble itself during wartime in World War II, and how P&G really hit at an accelerated pace of innovation through the war. And it was a really resonant story because, companies were pulling back. Everybody was afraid, and the sort of the lesson of the story was companies that keep innovating and focusing on innovation during crisis points are the ones that pull ahead afterwards. Tide, the detergent, the first $1 billion brand, came out of World War II and out of P&G during World War II. So I love that story. It had so many lessons. It was kind of a perfect Signal 360 story for me.
Yeah, and that's a perfect note to end on. And I think what it also means for me, John, is like a company like P&G with such a long and colorful history where there's lots to learn from. That's with Signal 360. We've added a little brick in that building, and it will last. I mean, the website will still be up. And I've been so grateful to be a little part of that and to have been able to work with you guys and the whole team to do that, right? And hopefully in some way or form, we'll still deliver a Signal over the years to come. And we'll find other ways to make people just, create a little bit more inspiration, education for people to get sharper ideas to execute on and build their own businesses or contribute to further growth of P&G. So with that, I want to thank all the people inside and outside of P&G who've been our audience. We've done it for you, and hopefully we'll pass across in the future again in some way or form. So thank you.
Thank you. Great run.